Cold didn't kill most soldiers. Loss of control did. Most people misunderstand winter warfare before they even begin thinking about it. They picture frost-bitten trenches, frozen rifles, snowstorms swallowing armies whole. But when you strip away the drama, the true killer of soldiers in winter was not temperature. It was loss of control, control of heat, control of moisture, control of air. Across every major winter campaign in history, the same pattern appears. Men didn't collapse because it was cold. Humans have lived in cold climates for tens of thousands of years. Before we go any further, if you're interested in the hard realities of history that most documentaries skip, take a second to like this video, share it with someone who loves military history, drop a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe to The Hard Past. This channel exists to preserve the knowledge that history tested under the harshest conditions imaginable. Now let's get into what winter actually taught the people who survived it. Why ancient humans solved cold without technology. Long before sleeping bags, zippers, or synthetic insulation existed, humans were already surviving extreme winters with consistency. What's important is that these solutions appeared independently across the world. Inuit hunters slept inside skin-wrapped cocoons. Sami herders used reindeer hide tubes. Mongolian nomads relied on dense felt rolls. Alpine shepherds crawled into narrow sleep sacks on exposed slopes. Roman soldiers wrapped themselves into enclosed winter systems rather than loose coverings. None of these cultures shared blueprints or science, yet they arrived at the same shape. This convergence matters. When unrelated societies solve the same problem the same way, it isn't tradition, it's physics. Flat insulation fails when humans move. The modern belief that insulation fails because it isn't thick enough is historically wrong. Thickness was never the deciding factor. Shape was. Flat blankets and traditional sleeping bags depend on stillness. They assume the human body will lie quietly, perfectly sealed, without shifting. That assumption collapses under exhaustion. Humans roll, curl, bend and breathe. Each movement pumps warm air out and pulls cold air in. Gaps form at joints and seams. Wind exploits them instantly. Ancient survivors didn't fight movement. They designed systems that tolerated it. Enclosed shapes didn't leak when the body shifted. Warm air circulated instead of escaping. Survival wasn't about comfort. It was about containment. The tube removed failure points instead of managing them. The survival tube wasn't an invention. It was a conclusion reached again and again by people who simply couldn't afford mistakes. A cylinder has no corners, no edges, no cold seams. Wind flows around it instead of penetrating it. Movement doesn't pump air out. Heat stays stable. The tube worked because it insulated space, not fabric. Fabric was just the tool shaping that space. Once you understand this, modern failures become obvious. Advanced materials mean nothing if the shape leaks. Survivors didn't ask how advanced their gear was. They asked whether it failed when they were tired, wet, or numb. The body was always the heater, not the gear. Historically, people understood something modern culture, often forgets. The body generates heat. Equipment only manages it. No ancient survivor believed their gear would make them warm on its own. They designed systems that captured and reused body heat. Inside a tube, warm air circulates instead of escaping upward. Clothing, insulation and enclosure work together as one system. Modern gear often tries to simulate warmth through loft or reflective layers. These methods depend on dryness and precision. When those disappear, so does the warmth. The tube preserved real heat rather than promising comfort. Moisture killed faster than cold ever did. Military medical records repeat the same lesson relentlessly. Wet soldiers deteriorated rapidly. Dry soldiers survived. Water stripped heat faster than the body could recover. Cotton became lethal once soaked. Synthetic fills collapsed under moisture and compression. Wool behaved differently. Even damp, it retained structure and trapped air. Waxed canvas resisted wind and snow, and as it absorbed moisture, it became more windproof. These materials managed vapour naturally. Condensation moved outward instead of pooling against the skin. The tube didn't eliminate moisture. It controlled where it went. That control kept people alive through the night. The ground stole more heat than the air ever could. One of the most consistent causes of winter death wasn't wind or snowfall. It was contact with frozen ground. Conduction drained heat relentlessly. Survivors always insulated below before worrying about above. Spruce boughs, straw, packs, spare clothing, even shaped trenches existed to lift the body away from the earth. No amount of insulation on top could compensate for heat bleeding into frozen soil. The tube only worked when paired with elevation. Loft preserved air. Air preserved life. Why soldiers kept ugly gear and abandoned impressive ones. Under desperation, soldiers discarded what failed. Decorative outerwear, rigid designs, fragile systems. What remained was heavy, crude, and effective. Waxed canvas, wool, enclosed shapes, curling postures, shallow trenches, behaviours resembling animals more than trained troops. This wasn't ignorance, it was adaptation. When death is close, aesthetics disappear. What survives is what works. Why this matters now? The tube wasn't forgotten because it failed. It was forgotten because society grew comfortable. Systems were replaced by products. Convenience replaced resilience. But physics didn't change. When power fails and storms isolate communities, survival returns to fundamentals. Control heat, control moisture, control space. History didn't preserve this knowledge out of nostalgia. It preserved it because winters tested it and spared those who understood. If you value the kind of history that was paid for in survival rather than theory, subscribe to The Hard Past, share this video, and keep these lessons alive. What history tested once will be tested again.